Okay, this is the Minuteman 1 guidance computer, and it's a really impressive little machine. One of the reasons that transistorized machines, integrated circuits, really came about was for computers like the Minuteman guidance computer that needed, a very compact space. And this has a radial situation so that all the things are sort of, around the sides. And to give you an idea, there'd be a little gyro down in that little hole in there, and the warhead would sit right there. So when we actually got this, we had to scan it with a Geiger counter to make sure that it wasn't, radioactive. But a really important machine, and this was, theoretically a one-time use computer. It would fly it to its target and blow it up. So really an important little machine. Another machine that's sort of strange and fun is right over here. This is the 1360 photodigital storage system by IBM. And you can see, if you take a look at that, that is roughly 64K bits, right on a little bit of film. And these are developed just like you would a slide. There's a wet developing system down in here that actually develops an image of the core memory onto those little slides. And it shoots them over to this using a pneumatic tubing system like you might find in a 1920s office. And then they're stored, and then the way they make this, they pull it out is there are these little rows of these boxes you can see here. And there's a row of couple of rows of boxes and then an empty row. And to get at it, it actually goes and it arranges it so that the box you want has all empty rows in front of it, and a vacuum just sucks it up and sends it off to the reader. And it reads it by putting a bright light behind the film, and then it exposes a little plate, which then sets the core memory of the machine to that standard. So really an important system. This is running up until about 1980, I believe 86. And a good long time for a system like this to run. But it was also and it had a huge storage capacity. 1 terabit was possible to store in this, and about 7 were manufactured, but unfortunately it was too expensive and had a lot of downtime, so it really wasn't a good option for the future. Also over here, this is a good demonstration of how much things have progressed. This drive here has one of those disks in it, and that's 10 megabytes. And nowadays we're looking at these micro drives over here, which are, a gigabyte or more. So, they're really, it's about 10,000 times denser, the possibilities are now, than they were back in the, 1970s. And you can see here, this is sort of our ode to the disk drive, and this here, you just had maybe a megabyte on it. Well, now we have incredibly amounts of storage. And these took up huge spaces of room, but now, everything has changed. And one of the reasons that a lot of storage has changed is right here. This is actually called the Project Minnow disk drive prototype. This is one of the first disk drives ever designed. It used an 8-inch floppy drive. And this is actually used not to store information, not to store data for users, but to update microcode in large disk drive systems like these up here. So, you would put your new microcode in a floppy and then you would insert it in. So really a pretty advanced system for 1970 or so, but really this one here is incredibly important to the future of computing. Now really business computing really started to catch on in a big way in the 50s, and this is one of IBM's first really successful business computers. This is the IBM 1401. This is the 1401 CPU, the 1402 card reader, and the 1403 printer. And the 1403 printer is what made this so useful. This is a high-speed printer, could do 600 lines a minute. So when this is going full bore, paper is shooting out the back at 4.3 miles per hour. It's really impressive to watch. But what's incredible about this system is that your larger systems, like your supercomputers that IBM sold, they would charge you per cycle. Well, you could dump all your information onto tape and print it using the 1401 system, which rented for about $1,200 a month. And that would save you huge amounts of money instead of having to print on your big machines. And this one was running up until 1984, and we're actually getting another one of these that we have, which got from Germany, up and running so that we can have a working 1401 system. Now, we sometimes get accused of being a little bit America-centric, but here's one of the interesting little German machines we have. This is a Zuse Z23 computer, and this is a transistorized machine from the early 1960s, and it had the Germans were sort of a step behind the US at this point. So they had only 200 words of core memory, which isn't a lot, and 4K of drum storage. These were both, very small by American standards at that time. But what's really interesting here is that this system was designed by a gentleman, Konrad Zuse, who was really impressive in that he had started really the computer world concept of a computer back in the 1930s and early 40s during the war. And he had actually gets a lot of credit for being the first designer of an electronic digital computer way back in the day. But this is one of his later machines when he started his own company. And this is actually the paper tape that is the last program this ever ran. And in German, it just sings a little song called Auf Wiedersehen, which is one of my personal favorites. But this is a really important machine. So, usually on a tour, at least one person will, recognize a machine that they worked on somewhere in the past.
And also, this is the IBM 360 is the first machine I worked on in college way back in the last century. And the first program was on punch cards using Fortran. I do keep up with new technologies. Now I'm using .NET. And people hate Microsoft. I'm also using open source, such as Linux, and Perl, and PHP, and so on. So even those old guys keep up with new technology.
Yeah, and us young guys don't. The 360 was a really important machine for today. And one of the great things about the 360 is that it was a line of computers that it wasn't just one serious computer, but it was a series of computers that all used the same peripherals that were all backwards compatible. So if you wrote something on your cheap cycles on your 360/30, you could run it on your fast, expensive cycles on your 360/90. And that concept really changed computing, and it really became very important to have that concept. Sort of to jump forward a bit, this is a pretty important machine of recent history. This is the first Google production server. And Google, of course, one of these big companies today, was just, started with a couple of these in their, offices, doing all sorts of traffic. And this is actually so incredibly cheaply made that they actually use corkboard underneath for all the pins and stuff to rest on. And it just, kept it nice and safe. But this is, the start of the next revolution in computing, with, everyone interconnected and so forth. Really made possible by machines like this. So this is really a really important machine from, 1999, but it's already, in a museum. That's sort of the speed that computing is going at nowadays. This here is the RAID prototype, and it was built by the only legal form of slavery left, grad students. And UC Berkeley actually has always been doing a lot of research into things like that. And this is basically the redundant array of inexpensive disks. And so the theory is that when you store information, it actually parses it between the disks, so that if you lose one disk, the others can reconfigure and, make up for that loss of information. So this is a really important concept to the future, and, every .com has one of these. It's now a billion-dollar industry, because, the ability to withstand occasional failures becomes hugely important when you're dealing with large amounts of information coming in and out. So, this one, really impressive machine. I believe each one of these has 100 megabytes in one of the disk drives. And, that's 10 times the amount as the very large disk drives that we saw a little earlier. So, really important system. Right here is one of my personal favorites. This is the only machine that has been both on the moon and in my car. This is the Apollo guidance computer. And really the impressive thing about this is the fact that this was one of the first systems to use integrated circuits, and there are little basically four transistor packages inside here. Another thing is that this is actually made mostly, not entirely mostly, but a good percentage of it is gold. So it's one of the most valuable things in the collection. But it's an impressive little machine, and this wonderful thing called the display keyboard, or the DISCI interface, with these huge buttons, because you had to be able to operate it with space gloves.